I was sitting having coffee with my wife, and she said to me, "You're going to do a 4 week series on technology? Are you kidding?" I said, "Yeah, I am." She said, "Good luck with that one." I said, "Okay." So it should be interesting. But I take it from a different angle. I'll tell you all about that in a minute. I want to begin by doing a reading from the language of letting go. And I picked a reading for October 29th, which, by the way, was is today, right? Yeah, yeah, okay. Acceptance. A magical portion is available to us today. That potion is called acceptance. We are asked to accept many things: ourselves as we are, our feelings, needs, desires, choices, and current status of being. Other people as they are, the status of our relationships with them, problems, blessings, financial status, where we live, our work, our tasks. Resistance will not move us forward. Acceptance is the magic that makes the change possible. It's not forever, it is for the present moment. Acceptance is the magic that makes our present circumstances good, brings peace and contentment, and opens the door to growth, change, and moving forward. It shines a light of positive energy on what we have and are. Through the framework of acceptance, we figure out what we need to do to take care of ourselves. Acceptance empowers the positive and tells God we have surrendered to the plan. Today I will accept or relinquish my need to be in resistance to myself and my environment. I will surrender, I will cultivate contentment and gratitude. I'll move forward in joy by accepting where I am today. I wanted to do that reading because I want to do something a little bit different when we talk about the aspect of technology in our world today. And I want to give you a couple of things just to kind of bring us into perspective with it. I'd like you to keep in the back of your mind that simple definition of addiction and a simple definition of codependency. Remember, we define codependency and we defined addiction as any person, place, or thing that I have become dependent on that creates unmanageability or craziness in my life. Keep that definition in the back of your mind as we go on a journey to explore different aspects of technology and to understand it and to understand where we are in it today. But to do that, I want to go back and look at history for a couple of minutes. You know, it's interesting when you look at the world that we live in today and go back and look at the world of the past. And I want to go back probably to the early 1900s. Back in those days, I wasn't around then. My parents were, but I wasn't. But in the early 1900s, it's almost like the three things that were predominant in our world. One was isolation, one was fear, and one was control. And if you'll notice, we didn't have a lot of the technology of today back then. But people lived in clusters. They lived amongst their own. And I remember growing up as a kid, I told you this before, and many of you understand this from where you came from, where people were immigrating to this country and literally coming from all different worlds. And because people were scared and afraid, they migrated into their own little groups. And yes, there was a lot of isolation, a lot of fear, a lot of control, a lot of survival. There wasn't a lot of communication between groups back then. It's almost like I didn't know you, you didn't know me. And so therefore I stay with my own, you stay with your own. And even the churches, everything was connected around that. People lived that way for a period of time. But then all of a sudden, began to realize that people began to, I guess in some ways, intercommute. And we began to see the mixture of different types of things. You know, it's ironical because today we talk about things such as interracial marriages. Back then, we talked about intermarriages between Irish and maybe Italian, or different types of individuals and people from different backgrounds. And the world always was in this process of trying to change, trying to open up. Our communication system way back then was also similar to that. I go way back to the Pony Express. I go way back to people that never really communicated with each other for months and months and months. And yet, after a period of time, we began to develop the concept of being able to communicate. Then in the 40s, we had something called a radio. And by the way, for many of our younger people today, you have to explain what a radio is. But a radio back then was one of the proper means of communication with the world around us. Also back then was the telephone. Not the way we know it today. The telephone was very antique and very much connected to a party line, things of this effect. And so literally, it was like we're trying to find different ways to come out of isolation, to start communicating with one another, to begin to open up a little bit to change. Now, there's a beautiful point to that, and yet there's a negative point to that. Because unfortunately, in that process of change, we also had the concept of prejudice, fear, more control. And as a result, then, people, even in communicating with one another, had a tendency to do a lot of gossiping and also forming a lot of opinions. And of course, there was a lot of tension. You know, we look at the world today and we see the tension in it. And we realize there was tension back then too. Because so many people were opposed to change, didn't want things to happen. Yet I've learned over the years that things happen whether we want them to or not. And so slowly but surely, technology came into existence. It was with the telephone and the radio at first. And then later on, we moved into a contraption called the TV. And back then it was very limited. But a little bit at a time, gradually, we began to build. And unfortunately, sometimes we have a tendency to build too fast. And so as a result, we have a tendency then to bring the world into the rebuilding. All these different ways of communications were necessary and they were good because they had a good side to them. Medical people started talking more to each other. We saw more medical advances. More experimental things were going on. At the same time, we had the rise of some epidemics that forced us to go in another direction. But at the same time, we began to realize change is part of the journey and is part of life. You know, believe it or not, I checked on that this morning. The first computer really went back to 1845. Of course, it wasn't a computer as we know it today. And then back in the early 1900s, it was used by the Army in many of their military exercises. So a little bit at a time, different things began to come into play. And the world began to change. And then music began to change. Communication has a lot of faces, goes in a lot of different directions. We had the rise of a musical generation that went from big band sounds to jazz, into rock and roll, into a whole different concept of the world. Even things like records began to change, from the huge record, the 33 to the 78 to the 45. Everything started to develop its concept of change. Telephones became a little bit more sophisticated. They were still complicated, but more and more things began to come into existence. Of course, along with this comes other things. See, we have to always look at in history the negative as well as the positive. The communication, the faces of it were very necessary. It did bring a lot of us out of isolation. It helped us to be able to overcome some of our fears. It helped us to be able to learn new things and move in new directions. But at the same time, there were people that opposed it, that fought it, that battled it, and also people that used it in a negative way. And so we saw a lot of negativity, a lot of craziness. We saw the rise of crime. Things began to happen. And so it's like we have this human nature we're dealing with. So technology and human nature go together. And we continue to see this happening as things develop. And then, of course, we had the Industrial Revolution. We had the development of different things in the world. History began to move very fast. After the Second World War, it moved even quicker. And now, all of a sudden, we began to see different forms of technology opening up. Computers came into existence, and the first computer was mammoth. It was huge. It was scary. And then it came into a smaller version, came into offices. And people, like human beings, were not happy about that. They were not happy about change. They fought it, they battled it. It's almost like, why are we coming into this new stuff? Why can't we do it the way it used to be? Why can't we go back? We're learning something very powerful through technology. You can't go back, I'm sorry. You can talk about it, you can make believe, but you can't go back. And so it progresses. Unfortunately, sometimes it progresses too fast and people don't know how to handle it. So technology can almost take over the world. And so we see the evolution of it come into, and I'll talk more about this in the second lecture, in a book that was put out called 1984, which was a book of predictions of a lot of things that were going to happen as a result of technology. And of course, the majority of that did come true. The world did change in that direction. But then we have to ask ourselves a question. Did it change for the good? Hopefully. Did it change for the bad? Probably. Because what are we doing? It's almost like we went from the world of isolation, the world of fear, the world of control, into a new world of isolation, fear, and control. And as a result, all of a sudden we developed new dependencies. Now all of a sudden we became very dependent on the telephone, on the newfangled phone now, this thing. And all of a sudden, in the beginning, it was large, it was big. It was like a little computer. And over time, it developed. And we began to realize the fact that now all of a sudden, I can get answers to things I never knew I could get answers to. As a friend of mine.
That sounds like a description of the evolution of the internet and personal computing.
What the heck? My phone started talking to me. You know what that was? That was Gemini. I got this thing shut off too. It's crazy. But anyway, the crazy part about it is you began to realize that's exactly what I'm talking about. It's almost like that thing called privacy, the home, began to change into something that everybody got to know everybody else. Now, is there a good point to that? Yeah. But was there a negative point to it? Yes. So as we go through life, we begin to realize the fact that all of a sudden, We don't have to research anymore. We have machines to research for us. We have things that give us quick answers to everything. Now, is that positive or is that negative? These are all questions we'll have to ask ourselves in the coming weeks as I do these programs. Is it positive or is it negative? But it comes down to us as individuals and how we use technology. Unfortunately, social media came into play, and we have different forms of social media. We have so many forms today that they keep popping up. More and more pop up. You know, even to the point now where we've come to something new called AI. Things are changing gradually. We don't have to think, constantly our thinking is taken away from us, and those things are done for us. Now, this takes us into the area of asking ourselves some questions on a physical, emotional, and a spiritual level, and also on a social level. We look at our physical bodies. Technology has helped us in many ways to develop new answers to diseases. It has helped us to be able to live longer. It has helped us to develop things in different directions. So yes, it's had a good outlet for us physically. We've learned more about how to take care of our bodies. But on the other hand, negatively, it's affected us in the sense that many of us basically stopped taking care of our bodies and wanted something else or someone else to do it for us. And so that concept of incentive, of being able to do your own thing, began to move away. And as a result, we became more and more dependent on machines, more and more dependent on mechanical things. And then we also learned, yes, I can live longer, but do I live a quality of life longer? Or is technology able to prolong that life, even through suffering and pain and everything else? You know, a good friend of mine who's 104 years old, he said to me, I said, are you really glad to be alive? He said, no. He said, why? I said, why? He said, because everybody's dead that I know. He said, the world has changed. I don't belong here anymore. Again, I understand that because it's almost like everything else has passed him by. Everything's changed and he's left behind. So the concept is, like I said, there's a positive, there's a negative, but it comes down to all of us looking at it within our own self. Emotionally, it has an effect on us also, because it affects our emotional system. Because now, you know, I can even create something that will talk to me. There was a special I just took part in where young kids now are creating their own AI partners, and they can share their thoughts and stuff with them. And they also get advice from them. And now we're starting to get advice from machines. So our emotional system, we got to be careful because we have to be able to know the need to be able to express our emotions in a positive way with positive people. So we lose that sense of community, that sense of belonging. Everything then becomes more mechanical. Is there a good side to that? Yes. Is there a negative side to it? Yes. We have to think about something which is really important as we go through this series of talks. We have to learn something called balance. How do I balance all this out in my personal life? How do I handle it in my personal life? You know, it's a lot of fun, and I know, to go to Google to get answers to everything. But now we have all kinds of different types of Googles. So now we can learn things in different directions. We get quick answers to everything. You know, just as an example, I never knew the first name of my blood grandmother on my mother's side. She basically never even used her mother's first name because her mother died when she was 2 years old. Guess where I found out the first name? I found that out on Google. I asked Google what the name of, I gave the information, and all of a sudden came back and told me her first name was Philomena. Now, that's great, that's wonderful, it's fantastic. But again, there's another side to it. It's almost like I went to the family and the family just kind of lost a lot of stuff. I couldn't find that information there. I had to go to a machine for the information. Then, as I also know emotionally, I become more dependent. So as a result, I basically use it to be able to handle my emotions. I can have 15 different games I can play on here to avoid having to think, to avoid having to deal with anything, to put things off. Is that good? Now, it could be good for an interlude, but if you use it all the time, it's not good. It's a place to hide and a place to isolate. So you always keep those three things in the back of your mind. Are we going back into isolation? Are we developing a dependency on different types of things that teach us that we fundamentally can't function without it? I mean, even today, I left my phone in a different room, came into my office. I looked around. I almost felt naked. I had asked Angela to go find my phone for me. Why? The bottom line is, if I didn't find it, what would happen? You know, I find it amazing. About a month ago, I forgot my phone and left it home. I came to work and worked the whole day without my phone. You know what? I'm still alive. I'm still on this side of the dirt. My world didn't come to an end. I survived. We have to all ask ourselves that question, because we get scared sometimes because our dependency, even in business, our dependency in the world we live in, is becoming more and more automated, more and more computerized. And even now, you can't even go to McDonald's now and order anything unless you have some technology and be developed. You can't do a lot of stuff today. It's all changing, but it changes too quickly, too fast. And what happens is human beings get left behind. Then we have to ask ourselves spiritually, is this developing my spirit? Am I developing a good sense of who I am as a person? Or is my need so much on technology keeping me from developing my personal life, my prayer life, my life connected to my higher power? Because then we ask the question, what is my higher power? Is it a God of my understanding? Or for many people, is it something like this? It can become very easily a new God, a new way of life. And then we go into the concept of using social media. Can it be used in a positive way or in a negative way? It can be used in many ways, because we can actually develop all kinds of controversy, all kinds of political craziness and insanity. It's used in very many ways to manipulate. And now all of a sudden it's become almost a gigantic business with scammers. People are using it, manipulating, getting information. So again, we have to be careful because we can so easily slide back into the same isolation we ran away from in the past. So if there's not a sense of community, a sense of being able to talk to each other, to spend time with each other, to socialize, or do we do it via a phone? I mean, yes, we're on Zoom today, and Zoom is a great tool, once again, if it's used properly. But again, I can also use it to isolate, because I can literally put mute, turn my picture off, I can hide, and let everybody else tell me what's going on, not put my 2 cents into it. But I can also be a participant. It's opened up new doors in different directions. I have friends in recovery now from different parts of the country. My sponsor lives in Oregon. I'm able to connect with people in different parts of the world, which is positive and good. But again, it comes down to that question we have to ask ourselves. Am I using technology to further myself, to develop my spirit, to work on my social skills? Am I using it in a positive way? Or am I becoming so dependent on it that I cannot function without it? And that if, God forbid, something would happen, how could I function? I even look at the concept today, and this happened one time to me when I was in a supermarket and the power went out. And all of a sudden the computers went down and nobody could check out. Of course, the girl didn't know what to do. She looked at us and said, I don't know, because now we scan everything. I have no idea how to find out what the real price is because I don't have this to find out what the real price is. So it came to a standstill. So we look at the world we live in today and we have even new forms of warfare, cyber warfare. We have new things to be afraid of. See, I think what scares me the most is the more you move into isolation, the more you move into fear, the more you move into control. And as a result, then, I want to be able to find my little world. I want to hide in it. We see this in different forms of addiction today. I can sit in my bed and I can gamble half my life away. Never have to leave my house. I can order my alcohol right into my house. It'll be delivered. I don't have to do anything. Or you want to be able to develop a life where I'm alive, I'm part of the world, I'm back out there, I'm connecting. I remember when I was umpiring baseball, we couldn't get kids to come out for a little league. They come out for senior league. Teams got smaller and smaller because everybody was too busy with their phones. And even we have to sit in school now with a phone. So we're being taught that. But then we ask ourselves a question. Can I learn things from the past, learn lessons from it, so I can move into the future and not make those same mistakes? Comes down to the question I put on my Facebook page today. Is this the new addiction, technology? Yes, it can be. It can also be the new adventure. It can also be the new awakening. See, it's got a lot of faces. It's up to us as individuals on how we use it, how we develop it, how we basically do not allow it to take over our life. So we have to realize the fact that yes, it's necessary. It has a lot of good, positive qualities to it. But do I have the capacity to sort out the negative from the positive? Do I have the capacity to learn from things that happen to it? So am I open to that? Or do I have to look upon the younger generation and pray and hope? Because we have no idea at all where things are going to go. And so as a result, then, you begin to ask yourself questions. Is this going to take over my life? Will I have a better life? I might have a more comfortable life, but do I have a better life? Do I have a spirit-filled life? Do I have an adventurous life? Or am I going to go back into isolation, back into hiding? And instead of me having to interact with other human beings, I can do everything on this. The saddest thing I ever saw in my life is when I saw my granddaughters sitting next to each other on the sofa and communicating through the telephone when they could be talking to one another. I just got tears in my eyes when I saw that. They're in the same room. They're practically next to each other. They're not talking to each other. The sad part about that is maybe it is a new form of communication. Maybe it's different. I'm communicating with my aunt or my uncle or my cousin in California, but not when I'm with my family. And so there comes a time when you have to shut it off. Just like earlier, I didn't turn Gemini on. Gemini would listen to my lecture, I guess. I don't know. And all of a sudden decided to put their 2 cents into it. You never know where things are going, where stuff is getting stored. When I looked at the book 1984, and I looked at the concepts, the things they talked about, way back then, a lot of people said, nah, that's just another one of those conspiracy theories. This will happen, that will happen. And then all of a sudden, I began to realize the author of that book had a lot of foresight into the world we're moving into today. A friend of mine said the other day, will there be a new 12-step program called Technologies Anonymous? I said, could be. Because again, it is another addiction. It can be. But we got to realize there's got to be that balance. And that's why we have to ask ourselves questions. And I'll be posing a lot of them out as I go through these talks. Ask ourselves, where am I when it comes to technology? Where am I physically, emotionally, spiritually? Where am I on a social level? Do I go into my house, close the door, put the blinds down, and just watch TV for 24 hours? Or do I go outside in the sunshine and interact with people, talk to my neighbors, get to know my neighbors? It's sad sometimes to realize you could live in a neighborhood and not know your neighbors at all. They become strangers. That's where we have to learn to take this beautiful concept of communication and use it in a positive way. Yes, it was tedious before. Many times to do some of my papers for my classes I had to go to, I had to do a lot of research work. Now, all I do is carry this with me and I can ask Google to help me do the research work. Now that's positive in one way, but it's also negative in another way. Because is it helping my brain? Is my brain being developed? Am I opening up doors? So again, these are questions. I want to put them all out there today. And when I pray today, I'm just praying that we can have an open mind to be able to search within our own selves where technology plays a role in our life. And is it positive or is it negative? So let us pray. God, we come before you in prayer. We ask the God of our understanding, our divine presence, to help us and to guide us on this journey. Teach us to look at the world that we live in. Teach us to look at the inventions of the world today and ask ourselves, are we able to live with things in a positive, productive way that will help us spiritually, to help us to grow? And as I look at myself and my spirit and my energy, I realize, am I open to new things, new directions, new concepts? Do I have an open mind? Do I have the adventure of new growths? Please help me, guide me, strengthen me, and teach me to learn a good sense of balance in all the things that I do. I ask this in gratitude, and I ask this in love. I ask that you may be a shining light to each and every one of us as we walk the tightrope of this world and the tightrope of technology. We pray and we ask this for guidance and direction, and we ask for it in your name. Amen.